Hi guys, this is Tekken57 and today I'm going to be recording a tutorial on how to splice heads from 3D models onto 2K19 models. The process of splicing is whereby you can take a head from an older model and you can attach it to a head on a 2K19 model. Why I do this is because you find the polygon count on older models is fairly low. And when you try to import these into 2K19, even if you add tools to increase the polygon count, the bodies don't always look as good or as detailed as the 2K19 models. So for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm going to be working with the psychosis model, and I'm going to be splicing this onto a 2K19 body. Okay, firstly what you need to do is you need to identify a body from 2K19 which is pretty much similar in shape to the model which you're working with. So for psychosis, I looked at most of the models in the game and I found that Randy Orton's model has the most similar kind of body shape. So I'm going to be splicing the head onto Randy Orton's body. The body doesn't have to be exact, but the closer in shape it is to the model that you are splicing, the better, because you will not need to make too much of sculpt changes once this is done. Alright, now I've imported the psychosis model. The way in which I've done this is I opened the model in X-Ray and I exported all of the objects and then I imported this into 3D Studio Max. I've done the same for Randy Orton's model. You'll notice right away that the psychosis model is quite small in scale, so we need to scale this up. So I'm just going to highlight the psychosis model. I'm going to right click on the select and uniform scale button and I'm going to type in 1000, I'm going to type in the value of 1000 in offset world, which is going to make this 10 times the size. Okay, so this should be about the same scale as the 2K19 model. Thereafter I'm going to move this model into position. So I'm going to try and get it. So I'm going to try and align this to Randy Orton's model. So for this, I'm going to go to one of the isometric views, and I'm just going to switch to one of the side views so I can see the model a bit better. And then thereafter, I'm going to position this. Okay, the main thing here is that you want to try and get the chin aligned with the model that you are going to be splicing to, because I'm going to be doing a splice just below the chin area. Okay, we'll just look in the front to see, I'll just take a look at the front view to see if the scale is correct. Okay, the scale of the model looks fairly correct. If you look at the arms, it's about the same length, and if you look at the body, the waist is about the same place as the Randy Orton model, so we don't need to adjust the scale any more than it's already been done. Alright, okay, so if I look at the psychosis model, the parts that we need will be object 10, object 11, object 12, and maybe object 13 because it's got the inner part of the eyelids as well. We have the psychosis head already prepped. Fortunately for us, you'll find that the psychosis head has already been nicely split around the neck area, so we don't need to delete any additional polygons. Alright, so what we're going to do now is we're going to combine all of these meshes for the psychosis head into a single mesh. So I'm just going to select these. I'm going to go into the utilities panel and I'm going to click on collapse. Okay, and then thereafter I'm going to click on collapse selected. All of the other selections which are defaulted can be left the way they are. So I'm going to click on collapse selected. Alright, now this is a single mesh. Now you'll find that if you look at the model, there are still quite a few areas where it looks like the model is in separate meshes. This is because there are vertices which are overlapping in these areas. So in order to make this one solid mesh without any overlapping vertices, we can use the vertex weld modifier. Okay, if you leave it at the default selection, you see that the face has no detail, so we're going to reduce this to 0, 0, 1. Okay, and you can see now that the mesh looks like one solid mesh without any overlapping areas. Right, now before we splice this model to Randy Orton's neck, you have to remap the UVs. Okay, the reason why you need to remap the UVs is because the UVs for the head, which we are going to be splicing to the neck, need to be right next to each other. When we are using the tools to splice, 3D Studio Max will also try to combine the UVs of both. And if these are not directly next to each other, you'll find that the UVs end up getting corrupted along the area which we are splicing. Alright, so I've already prepped the texture. What I've done is I've taken the psychosis head texture and I've made a texture using Randy Orton's head texture. Okay, the important thing here is that the chin area needs to correspond with the chin area of the texture which you're going to be using. So if you look at Randy Orton's head, this texture, the chin of this texture sits pretty much on the chin of where Randy Orton's texture used to be. As I said before, the splice is now going to try and combine the UVs of both these textures, and this is the area where we're going to be doing the splice, so the UVs for this area will also be spliced. Alright, so let's apply this texture to the head. Okay, so you can see the textures are not mapped correctly. So I'm going to go back into our modifier list and use the unwrap UV modifier. Okay, I'm going to click on Open UV Editor. Okay, I'm going to select the texture which has been assigned to this model. Alright, now if you look at the UV editor, you will see that we have the option to now adjust the UVs. I have the option to tile the textures using the tile bitmap option, so I suggest you do this as well. The reason for this is because you'll find that your UVs could be positioned somewhere else altogether in UV space, and we need to try and get this and the head object from 2K19 in the same vicinity. So if you look at this, this is the second row from the bottom and it's in the middle. So let's just take a look at our 2K19 head before we do anything further. Alright, so let's just select the texture. Alright, so this is also second row from the bottom and it's in the middle as well. Okay, so the head that we're going to be splicing is in the correct vicinity. So now we need to set the UVs of the new head correctly. So let's do that. Okay, so now that I'm happy with the UVs, I am ready to splice this to the 2K19 head. So let's open the 2K19 head. Let's just hide this object. Now we want to splice this to the neck of the 2K19 object, so we do not require the polygons for the face upwards. Right, so we need to delete these. So let's just get rid of this unwrap modifier. We don't really. Alright, so let's just get rid of this unwrap modifier on the object 0 because we don't really need that. And I'm just going to go into my material editor, and I'm just going to assign it a blank material so it's easier to see the polygons. Alright, I'm going to select this and I'm going to go into the polygon selection, and then thereafter I'm going to also display the object 11, which we're going to splice. Okay, now I'm going to go into one of the orthographic modes so we can see both heads at once. I like to go into one of the side views so it's easy for me to select and delete the polygons which are not needed. Both heads, and it's easy for us to now select the polygons that we don't need. So I'm going to select this to about there. It's the chin area to about there. Okay, now in order for the splice to work, we need a slight gap between the neck and the mesh that we are going to be splicing. So I'm just going to delete the polygon so that we have a slight gap between these. Okay, so let's just look at that in our normal view. Okay, so we can see that we have a slight gap between this and the mesh that we are working with. If you do not have a slight gap, then we need to go and further edit these. So let's just do a few more. So I'll go and delete this area here. Don't really need this. And also maybe there. Okay, maybe these also here. And then this side as well. See, do we have a gap here? Yeah, okay. Here maybe a little bit more. Okay, with these, it's very close to the neck. If we're going to delete the polygon, we're going to create too big a gap. So let's just move some of the words a little bit lower. I like to use the source selection tool, so it gives it a nice smooth kind of curve rather than just selecting a few words. So let's just move this slightly downwards here as well. Okay, these as well. Okay, so we've got a nice gap there. Here as well. Okay. Now, remember we're going to try and splice this gap. Yeah, so we want the neck positions to be as close as possible. And if you see here, this already looks like if you look at this area, you can see that this is not really going to give a nice smooth kind of join. So let's adjust the polygons a bit more on the neck that we're going to be splicing. So let's just go into our vertex selection again. I still have soft selection selected, and I'm just going to try. I still have the soft selection selected, so let's just increase the distance of the soft selection tool, and let's bring this a bit back. Maybe this as well, so make it a bit smoother. Okay, that looks a bit better. Let's just check the other side as well. Okay, so once again we don't have a gap, so let's just move this slightly down. Like there. Okay, that looks good. The sides of the neck, let's see if we need some work there as well. Okay, I can see this is quite far out, so let's just move this a bit more in. Okay, that looks decent. Let's just see on the other side. Okay, this one needs to go out slightly. Let's do that. Okay, the front and the sides look okay, I suppose. I think the jaw needs to be aligned slightly more. I think the chin area needs to be slightly off-centered a bit, so let's just move this more this way. That looks a lot better. Okay, and you can see here there's no gap as well, so let's just move this slightly downwards. Right, so okay, so we have a mesh, so we have the neck mesh and we have the head mesh, which are now two separate meshes, and you can see that there's a slight gap between both meshes, and we've remapped the UVs of the head. Okay, I'm just going to assign the neck mesh the same texture so we can see what it looks like, because I've used the Randy Orton texture, the neck texture's UVs are already correct. Alright, so now we are ready to do the splice. So before we do that, I usually like to make a copy of the meshes before we go any further. I do this just to ensure that I have a backup of the work before I proceed. In case I mess something up or the splice doesn't turn out as planned, then I can always revert to my backup. So I'm just going to select both the meshes. I'm going to click on Edit, and I'm going to click on Clone. I'm going to click on Copy. Okay, and now we've got two additional meshes which are backups. I'm just going to hide those. Okay, so now I'm going to join these. So now I'm going to combine both these meshes into a single mesh. So I'm going to select both of these. I'm going to once again go into the Utilities panel, and I'm going to click on Collapse Selected. Okay, now this is a single mesh. Okay, so the way in which you're going to do this is, firstly, we're going to convert these to an editable poly. The reason why it needs to be an editable poly and not editable mesh is because with editable poly you can select the border of meshes, and you can't do this with an editable mesh. If you click on border and you click on the edge where the gap is, you'll find that this selects the entire border, even going down to where the neck meets the clavicle. So we don't want this to happen. So in order to avoid this, we need to give this mesh a vertex weld, once again with a value of 0, 0, 1. Now because we've selected because we've added a vertex weld modifier, and we need to select the border level of the mesh, we will give it a edit poly modifier, which then allows you to select the border. Alright, so now we're going to select the border again, and you'll find that now this only selects the border where the gap exists, and then thereafter we are also going to select the border of the head object. Okay, with both the borders selected, we are going to scroll down and we're going to use the bridge tool to combine these meshes. Okay, so I'll click on Settings, which allows you to adjust how the bridge should look. Okay. Okay, and this will now bridge the gap between both the meshes. Okay, I'm just going to give it a solid gray texture so we can see what it looks like. Alright, now there's a couple of options that you can adjust with the bridge tool. There's a twist and also a second twist, which you can use. Sometimes this helps make the bridge look a little bit smoother. There's a smooth option. I like to set this to about 7 or 8. It just makes the join look a little bit better. You can adjust it based on your preferences. All right, and then you've also got other options which I don't adjust. When you're happy with the bridge, you click on the OK button, Okay, and now it's bridged both the meshes. Now if you look at it, it looks quite bad because you can see clearly that there's a join. So what we're going to do now is we're going to click on edge. Click on the edge level, you'll find that the join that we've just done is selected. I'm thereafter going to go into soft selection, and I'm going to select a few more edges around this area. Okay, so I'm just going to try and get this down to around the neck area. Okay, so yeah, about there should be fine. And I'm now going to try and apply a mesh smooth modifier on this. So it will smooth this area out, add a few more polygons and verts to this area so that the joint doesn't look as bad as it does. Alright, so let's click on the mesh smooth modifier. You can see already this looks a lot better. I'm just going to uncheck this button that says apply to whole mesh, because we only want to apply this mesh smooth on the area which we've just joined. Okay. Alright, so you'll find that okay, you can try different subdivision methods to see which looks best. Okay, I think classic looks quite good. Alright, so now that the mesh smooth has been applied on the area, there's quite a few more polygons and verts which are applied to this section, which can now be smoothed out. Alright, so now I'm going to export this model, and I'm going to import this into Mudbox, because Mudbox has tools which you can use to smooth. Alright, so I have the model in Mudbox, and I'm going to use some of the tools to make the spliced area look a lot better. So I'm going to use the smooth tool. I'm going to set a value of 1, and I'm going to smooth this area out. Alright, you can also adjust the value of the smooth tool depending on how big the area you want to smooth is. For me, the value of 1 seems okay. You just want to try and get the areas where you've joined looking a lot better and a lot more smoother. You want the transition between both meshes to look quite good. If the smooth tool doesn't do the job in certain places, you can also use the relax tool, and the relax tool will allow us to get a nice smooth transition between two meshes, get a nice smoother curve. Okay, to me this looks pretty good. You can adjust this as much as you want to try and get this as neat as you want. The reason why I like to do the splice around this area is because most people usually have creases around the neck, where the neck meets the head. So if you have some areas where the mesh is not exactly 100% smooth, it still looks pretty good in game. Alright, I think that looks pretty good. Let's just... Alright, I think that looks pretty good. So let's just export this back into 3D Studio Max. If we look at the model now, you can see that it's a lot smoother than what it used to be. If we look at the vertex count, this is 2,499 vertices. This is because the head object from older games is much lower poly and has a much lower vert count than the 2K19 models. Now, if you are using a higher resolution model from any other game that you are importing from, or a custom head that you've sculpted, then you'll find that your vert count is much higher and you won't need to go and do the following step, which I'm going to do. However, because this is a a head which I've taken from an older game, with a much lower vert and poly count. I'm going to give it a mesh smooth modifier to increase the detail on the face. Now I'm just going to select the area of the neck up to the head. The bottom part of it is taken from 2K19, so there is sufficient detail in this area. I'm going to go into mesh smooth. You can use mesh smooth, tessellate, or pro smooth. Each of these give different results, and you can try and see which looks best for your model. I'm just going to use mesh smooth. Okay, and I'm just going to give this a pro optimizer modifier just to see what our polygon count is. So let's just do pro optimizer. Okay, and this is going to give us, so you can see that the amount of vertices is 14,000, okay, which is too high. Also, in our mesh smooth, we want to ensure that we do not apply to the entire mesh. We only want to apply to the area which I've selected. So I'm going to deselect this. You can try a few different options. You can try classic, nums, quad output, etc. I'm going to go with classic. If I look at Pro Optimizer now, you'll find that there are 12,000 verts, which is too high. So I'm going to reduce the amount of smoothness for the mesh smooth. I'm going to bring this down to about 0.9. Okay, let's just check our Pro Optimizer again. Now this is about 6,000. Okay, so I find that if you can get your heads to about between 6 to about 8,000 verts, it looks pretty good in game, and it doesn't really cause any issues. If you go much higher than that, you have issues in game in terms of file size, because remember, you need to create animated meshes for each of the expressions for this head as well. And if this has 15,000 vertices, you've got to multiply 15,000 vertices by the number of animations in a game, which is over 100. We can make this up to higher, so let's go to about 7.3. Let's just check Pro Optimizer again. Okay, 7,075. Okay, that's cool. Let's delete the Pro Optimizer. So, all right. So we have a nice high poly head which has been spliced, and you can see that the area around the neck looks very good. So now we can export this to NIF. So firstly, we need to apply the normal modifier. And then click on export. Okay, and we're going to export this to a NIF file. Okay, and I'm going to call this head. Okay, we're going to select Dark Age of Camelot, and I'm going to click on export. Right, so now I'm ready to build a custom mesh using the head which we've just created. So I have Randy Orton's model open. I'm just going to click extract all, and I'm going to select the folder which I've prepared, which is meshes. Alright, so I'm going to build a custom mesh, and I don't really require any of the attire objects. So I'm going to use everything from object 1 up to object 16. And I'll click on Control P. I'm going to select the Y object which we're going to use as a base, in this case Randy Orton's. Okay, thereafter I'm going to select the meshes, which is in the meshes folder. I'm going to select the head object and everything up to object 16. I don't have object 0 because I'm not going to be using Randy Orton's head, and I don't have any other objects behind. I don't have any other objects beyond object 16 because I don't require any of the attire objects for now. Okay, so we'll wait for X-Ray to load the objects for us. Alright, so you can see that the head object is first. Firstly, we need to make this m_head. Okay, so the game knows it's a head object and can apply a masking accordingly. Then the number of animations is 120. Okay, I determined this by looking at one of the other animated objects. Okay, we need to select the correct shader. In this case, we want this to be assigned the shader for a head using the skin shader. Okay, and I'm going to click on create Y object. And if I open up this Y object, you can see that the head has now been spliced onto Randy Orton's body. Okay, now that this has been imported into the Y object, you can go and make any other adjustments you want, such as scaling the head, moving the neck, etc. Okay, now before this can be used in game, you need to rig the head to the model as well. Okay, so I'm just going to export this and I'm going to call this psychosis head. We need to rig this to Randy Orton's model. Okay, so I've opened up Randy Orton's model in 3D Studio Max, and I'm going to rig the head to this model. Okay, so let's import that head first. So I'm going to show you two methods which you can use. Okay, so the first method is skin wrap. So I select the head. Okay, I'm going to click on skin wrap. Okay, I'm going to add the meshes which this must wrap to. So I'm going to select the head, and I like to select the meshes which this is attached to as well, which is the chest and the arms. Okay, you leave it on vertex deformation. Set your fallout value to as low as possible. Click on weight all points, and then click on convert to skin. Okay, this will convert this to a skin modifier. And then thereafter, you need to go into advanced parameters and set the bone effect limit equal to that of the weight count. In this instance, I know the weight count is 7 because I set this when creating the Y object. Okay, with the skin modifier selected, then you can run the script to export the bone weights to the file. Okay, the weights have been exported. Now I'm going to go back into the model and I'm going to click on import weights. Okay, I'm going to select object 0. Okay, and the weights have been imported successfully. Thereafter, you can inject this Y object into your game and it should work without any issues. Remember, you still need to go and create the facial animations for this model. I've detailed this in another tutorial. And you also need to create your pack file with appropriate textures and stuff. And rigging it. Second alternative you can use to rig this model is much simpler. Is by just clicking on the Randy Orton head, copying the skin modifier, and pasting it over the psychosis head. Okay, sometimes this works well, sometimes it doesn't work well. Sometimes you have rigging issues by just copying and pasting it. So you can try both methods and see which works for you. I prefer the skin wrap method because it usually produces better results for me. So once again, set the advanced parameters and set the bone effect limit to 7, and then export bone weights to file and then import again. Alright, so that's pretty much the end of the tutorial. It's a pretty advanced tutorial, as you can see, and I've covered quite a few concepts that you will need to understand in earlier tutorials before attempting this tutorial, so I suggest you go and watch some of my earlier tutorials on custom meshes. I hope this tutorial was helpful to you and that you can create many cool mods using the techniques that I've outlined. Until next time, happy modding and take care.